you like. I just want to let you know that we do offer webinars pretty regularly, so you can find out what's coming up by signing up for our newsletter there. And our applied research program, Quality of Care, has a webinar series called Healthy Discussions. Experts on healthy topics come in, and there's an opportunity for the public to interface with those folks and engage in the discussion. So you can see the past recordings at the QR code there. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sara.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Chelsea, for a very warm welcome. As Chelsea said, we are from the BC Support Unit, and it is wonderful to be with you all here today to talk about the Patient-Initiated Research Assistance Program, or PIRAP. But maybe before we start, we can start with some introductions. And if I may, I'd love the opportunity to start with one of our patient partners. So Sunny, maybe I will hand it off to you, and then maybe Laurel and Larry.
Great, thank you. Put me on the spot as the first one. I'm Sunny Liu. I'm been with the BC Support Unit since 2016 and have participated in a number of their engagement. It's fabulous to have the patient voice so involved, and I've been working with this project for a number of years now, and I'm very happy to be able to talk to you about it.
I'm Laurel Radley. I've also been with the support unit, I think, since inception. So, and I've been doing patient volunteer things for about 16 years now, regionally and provincially and federally. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is the idea of patients having and citizens having some say in how our tax dollars are spent on research. So this is an exciting idea for me.
Thank you for having us. I'm Larry Mraz. I am the Patient-Oriented Research Capacity Development Lead. I can just make up these titles. I'm kind of like Chelsea's counterpart, which is kind of interesting because I'm also from Northern Ontario, as Chelsea is, and I grew up in the Maritimes. So it's nice to be back in the Maritimes. Although, so I'm really excited to be here today with these two wonderful patient partners. I'm kind of like the extra person here in a lot of ways, because this is really Sunny and Laurel's show, because we want to talk about their experiences being part of this project. So thank you very much for having us.
Thanks, Larry. So I'm going to take the opportunity to just quickly start sharing my screen. Is everyone able to see this?
It's just loading, Asada. Oh, there
Thanks,
we go.
Chelsea. Excellent. Thank you so much. So the Patient-Initiated Research Assistance Program, or PIRAP, ran between 2020 and 2023. And today we're going to speak a little bit to the project and also the experiences of our patients partners on this project. We have some slides to share, and then we have the opportunity for a Q&A with Laurel, Sunny, and Larry. So I think I'm going to hand things off to Laurel, who's going to start our discussion.
So you might be wondering how this whole idea came about. And Sunny and I were both members of the BC Support Unit Patient Council. Back in 2019, we had an opportunity as a council to choose a project. We were given a specific, I think then it was $20,000, and I have to say kudos to the support unit for having increased that over time and expanded deadlines, because the project turned out to be a little bit bigger than we had first anticipated. But as a patient council with representatives from throughout the province, we brainstormed on what kind of project we might be able to do. And with my focus on, gee, it would be nice if patients chose what kind of research to be done, I'd had some personal experiences. I had an elderly aunt with Alzheimer's, and I was the person most responsible for her care. So I saw her through several two long-term care facilities and an assisted living. And my aunt was kind of cantankerous, and she had Alzheimer's, and she would get confused, and she would often get a bit unruly. And I was called in a few times. Laurel, your aunt's behavior is problematic. Can you come? And I developed a strategy where I would come in, and I kept some large water glasses in her room. And I would come up to her and say, Auntie, here's the glass of water you wanted. And often she would drink a large glass of water. And sometimes 15 minutes later, I would come back again and say, Auntie, here's the water you wanted. And she would drink more water. And I had observed that residents in long-term care, every time they were offered pills, they were offered a little Dixie cup of sweet beverage. And other than that, there was no real push to hydrate them, except for during periods of heat waves. I noticed that my aunt's behavior changed substantially when she was well hydrated. Sometimes she drank the water, sometimes it took me half an hour to persuade her to drink. But it seemed like she became clearer, her mood changed, she became more steady on her feet. And I thought, I wonder what would happen if everyone in long-term care was really adequately hydrated. My nursing background said maybe there'd be fewer urinary tract infections and all the consequent complications that fall out of that. Maybe there'd be fewer incidents of acting out. Maybe there'd be less use of drugs to control people's behavior. And I, as a patient partner, I was going to conferences, and every time I was at a conference where there was some I'd say, anybody interested in doing research on this? And I had no takers. And so finally, here was this opportunity, and I said, this would be great if there was some way that the public could actually suggest ideas for research and have those ideas taken up and maybe be able to participate in that research. So that's how the idea came about. And other people on the council had similar thoughts, and so we went with that. And we chose to call it the patient-initiated research assistant program. So the idea was then just to figure out if it was possible to develop something like that, and then maybe to suggest that the BC Support Unit might have some kind of role.
So the purpose and objectives, you can read a bit of that on the screen, but I'm going to just touch a bit about why this project is important and why it's important, particularly for me. Patient-oriented research is significant in that it places patients a partner at the table for research that relates to their health and not just mere subjects. Traditionally, patients are just subjects of research, but now we can actually have a voice around the table with the rest of the research team. It empowers patients to assume more control over their health care and ensure results are practical, implementable, and best use of research investment. Patient-initiated research, in my view, is a progression of this partnership in that now we, the patient, can initiate research into topics that may not have significance for clinical or academic researchers, the traditional researchers, as I call it, but have priority for us, the patients, and for how we live without particular illness or issues. Health research is very important to me in particular. I am alive now and living an almost normal life because of health research that made possible the treatment for my chronic autoimmune disorder, a rare form of vasculitis. Prior to 1970s, a patient with this disorder has a 10% 2-year survival rate, with majority dying within 5 months. As a rare disorder, researchers' priorities, and rightfully so, are understanding and treating this illness. But now, with a much better long-term outlook, my research interest is much more focused on quality of life. How can I and others like me manage the effect of our illness over the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Patient-initiated research allows me to conduct studies in areas that directly affects my issues. The question is, how can I initiate research study? What do I do? How do I start? Who do I ask? Who can help me? How can I get funding? And who would take me seriously? These are the questions that prompted us to undertake this project. So the purpose is to assess the possibility of creating such a program, an assistance program, by identifying and exploring some of the key factors that would need to be considered in its design and functioning. What we have done in this particular phase of the project is to conduct the environmental scan that explores some of the factors found in the literature and that are important to consider in supporting or conducting patient-initiated research, and to explore the experiences of people in conducting or supporting patient-initiated research. And the result of this particular phase is to create a report to help inform the development of such a program. Larry, I'm going to pass that on to you, please.
Thank you, Sonny. So, Sonny, you're going to introduce the team, yes.
Yes, sorry, I missed the most important part of this project, which are the people involved in it. We want to thank, of course, the BC Support Unit and the Michael Smith Health Research BC, in particular the VP of Research, Danielle Lavallee, for sponsoring this project. And we have Laura and myself as the patient partner, but I also like to pay tribute to the entire patient council that was involved in the decision to undertake this particular project. Colleen McGavin, the former project lead, who's worked with us to start this whole process. Person who's not with us today because he has now ventured off into more exciting engagement, which is our research assistant, Ryan Fairbrother, and a librarian to help us, because as we learn from this project, there are a lot of material to cover to even find out whether it is valid to undertake such a project. And finally, our scientific lead, Larry.
All right, that's my cue. As Laurel and Sonny just told us, the patient-initiated research is a complex issue, and we had a lot of questions about how we could support patient-initiated research in British Columbia. And so the very first part of this whole project was to understand, first of all, what exactly is PIR? What are the parameters, and some of the questions that Sonny asked, like how does one go about doing it? How can someone be supported doing it? What are the research questions? How do you not know if a research question has been asked already? A lot of questions. So this is why we decided to do the environmental scan. And we did it in two separate stages. First of all, we did a literature search with our lovely librarian, Mimi. And we just looked at thousands of titles, over 1,000 titles of articles and documents. And we read through almost 160 abstracts. And at the end, we found that only 10 articles, and actually 9 articles and 1 white paper, actually met our criteria for patient-initiated research. And that is, again, if you remember our definition, that the project is initiated by and then supported by and run by the patient partner. So we found that the literature was kind of all over the place, and there wasn't a lot of very clear understanding of what actually patient-initiated research is. So that was one of the first hurdles that we went through. But then we started interviewing people, and like the articles, we discovered that people had a very different idea of what patient-initiated research was. So we contacted about 19 people and interviewed them about their experiences. And of those, 15 of the interviews actually had information on actual patient-initiated research as we defined it. So we were able to take the information from those interviews and from those articles that we found, and we put them together. And then we did what we call a combined thematic analysis. Simply means that we took the different types of data from the literature and from the interviews. We compared them. Ryan did a lot of that work. And we're going to talk about the interviews a little bit later. Laurel is going to tell us a bit more about that. But we looked at all this information that we gathered. We looked at what are some of the dominant themes, and that is, what were some of the overarching things that came out of this work, and we put them together into an analysis. That's all that means. Next slide, please, Dara. So let's talk a little bit about what we found. As you note, this presentation isn't really a findings presentation. We're much more interested in the experiences that Sonny and Laurel had doing this project, because this project, as Laurel said, was actually initiated by patient partners and led by Sonny and Laurel. So in many ways, this is a patient-initiated research project about patient-initiated research. I think there's a TV show episode in there somewhere. So let's take what we found, though. First of all, we have to remember that PIR is a type of POR, but it has an important distinction. And patient-oriented research engages patients meaningfully in the research. But for PIR, the patient initiates the research. and then is actively involved in leading the research. So it's a very particular kind of patient-oriented research. So we discovered that certainly when patients get started in doing this work, they need a lot of help in understanding, for example, what the literature already says. Doing the literature search and review is extremely difficult, and it is a barrier to patients getting started in this work. Writing a research proposal, understanding if the research question has been answered already, is the project doable? All these things need to be addressed in order for even just to get started with a patient-initiated research project. So we're not going to talk too much about the findings. But let's move on to the next little bit of findings, Sada. When we sort of looked at, again, as I said before, we looked at what sort of themes came out of this, and we discovered that a lot of what we found were kind of about the processes around research, and that is how do you actually do it? How do you create a team? How do you manage power dynamics in a team? How do you manage the fact that researchers have a lot of experience in research, but patients don't? How do you manage communication? That's a big one. And of course, the importance of relationship building. All these things are really important processes in doing patient-initiated research that have to be addressed before you can even start doing it. But beside those ways of doing things, there's also these, what are the actual material supports, the structures that need to be in place to support a patient partner in doing this work? And there's a lot on that we found. We're not going to go into it, all of it, but we think some of the highlights of that were the resources that were needed to be available for patient partners to understand the research. We need to have library access for patient partners. We need to have training available, lots and lots of structural support that a researcher must provide the patient partner to allow them to be able to lead the research. So again, we're not going to go into too many of those details, but we can bring some of them up in the panel discussion. And I didn't miss anything there, Sunny and Laurel? No? Okay, good. Always checking. All right. So let's take a look at some of the final recommendations.
Sorry, I was muted. Basically,
go ahead.
We were looking for a pathway so that patients could actually have somewhere to go to propose their research ideas.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that, Laurel, because that was one of the early on in the project, Laurel, actually, we were saying, she said, there's no obvious pathway for patient partners to do this work. For researchers, we have obvious pathways. We know we're trained. We have institutional support. We know we do book, A, B, C, D. There's a set way of doing this work, but it's not available, and it's not known or available for patient partners. So that's kind of an important piece of this. And one of the recommendations that we had is to develop that pathway, make it clearer. But then the other thing was that it was apparent that we needed to connect the patient with the research team early on in the process, so that the research team can support some of that work, like the literature search, like designing the research question, like writing the research proposal, all those things that researchers take for granted that we need to think about. And again, that material support and assistance is essential, right? We cannot just say to a patient partner, okay, go do a literature search, because how do you get access to a library? How do you get access to literature? And like, do you know how to do a literature search? How do you collect information from literature? All these sort of questions need to be answered. So we came up with these 3 very overarching recommendations that have a bit more attached to them, but this is kind of meant to give you a taste of what we did for the project, because now I'd like to talk a little bit more. As I said, this was a peer project about peer, so that sort of, we had a lot of learnings as we went. We had a lot of aha moments. Certainly Ryan and I, when we were doing the work, we were like, oh, okay, this is what we're reading, is what we're experiencing. So I think we're going to go into a little bit about, we're going to finish up with the slideshow and go into a little bit about, what was it like doing this study? What were the highlights of getting involved in this? What was surprising? What worked? What needed improvement? These are the questions that we're considering. So I'm just going to open it up to our wonderful patient partners to start telling us about their experience.
So the aha moment for me, Larry, is, I have in my career touched upon research, but more interacting with researchers. And then as a patient, I've been involved in research, but always been along for the ride. I was a passenger. My role was relatively passive, even though I'm actively involved in the research, but I'm either as a subject or one of the patient partner invited to have a voice. But it's a passive role. What I have found in the patient-initiated research is now we are in the driver's seat for that particular study. We are playing as a patient, playing the active role, and it's complex, as Laurel alluded to, and in the slide, there's no pathway. We have no experience of background behind us to actually get onto this pathway to undertake a study. And so we realized, at least I realized very quickly, that patient-initiated research, yes, me as a patient is playing an active in the driver's seat role, but it's also a role that's part of a team that is entirely a team process, because me as a patient do not have the experience, expertise behind me to drive the whole bus. So I need all the other members of that team, which is not different from how I normally have experienced research and research team. But now the difference is it is a research that meets my priority, that I need to, that I actively go and push for and drive that particular process. So that was one of the things that I discovered when I was going through this whole study.
So Sunny alluded to roles, and I think that was a really interesting part of this project, because we were kind of figuring out our roles as we went along to some extent. I remember at when we decided that we would include interviews of people, it was assumed that Ryan, the research assistant, would do the interviews. And at one of the meetings, I said, well, wait a minute, I have a lot of experience interviewing people. How about if I do some of the interviews? And we had some discussion around that. And I think Sunny said, well, hang on, would that change the data if a different person is interviewing? And I thought, well, no, because there's a whole bunch of multi-center research being done around the world, and clearly different interviewers are used. So at that point, Ryan and Larry kind of said, well, sure, why, let's do that. And so Sunny and I had already played a part in developing the interview questions. And so we did a little mock-up interview just so that we could experience it, and it worked really well. And so I was really delighted by the team's willingness to pivot and to look at different things and to be open to suggestions and to changing our roles somewhat throughout the process.
So can I ask Laurel then, did you, I'm putting on the spot here, did you feel supported then in doing those interviews?
Well, yeah, like I said, it was nice to do a little mock-up practice, and yeah, so yeah, and yeah, so I did feel, like I said, supported, and Sunny actually played the interviewee, and Ryan was the technical person, and so we had a little run through, and it was something that I'm pretty comfortable and confident doing, and so it was, for me, it was nice to be able to make a contribution using those skills.
Now, I kind of jumped ahead a bit, but Laurel, can you tell us a bit more about the background of this project? I know you told us a bit before, but is there anything else that you need to tell us that that you think was missing from your introduction?
I think I'm not certain about, but what I spoke about was the idea that brought us there. I could speak a little bit more about the experience as we went through and some of the things that came out of it. I'm not sure if that's what you're looking for, Larry.
I just wanted to make sure that we covered everything that we were wanting to cover before. That's all.
I could talk a little bit about some of the things that we discovered as we went along.
Sure, that's
We
great.
discovered that I've worked with other research teams on projects as more of an advisor, as Sunny mentioned. And sometimes, you know, those researchers are not just working on that project. And so a little bit of a learning process to figure out, oh, well, this is only one of many things. And sometimes meetings seem to be few and far between. And so for me, sometimes it was a bit of a challenge to get caught up on, oh, we met a month ago, we met 2 months ago. I need to review all of that information before I'm ready to carry on with today's meeting or tomorrow's meeting. So that was an interesting piece. Um, yeah. Sunny, did you have any experiences?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I experienced, and I meant this in a positive way, is patience. You really need to have patience. Um, First of all, you are working, and I was working with a number of people. Um, Being a retired person, I spent most of my time on my own with my dog, with my wife, playing around my workshop. But here I am working with a team. So you have the whole team dynamic that you need to have some patience in working and trying to understand what each other needs are. The other part that require patience is the time. I like to go in, do a project, get it done, get out. But what I have discovered is that there are a lot of processes that have to take place within a research study. You got to go and first of all, design and develop the study process, what you want to do, what do you want to say about it, what do you want to get out of it. Then you got to go and acquire funding, which means you have to go and present all that material to somebody to try to convince them to give you the money to undertake the study. And then you got to go and find out if anything has been done before in this area. So you have to go dig through all the material to do the research. Then you got to do this, and you got to do that, and it's not a short 2 week, 2 month project. For us, it worked out to be over 2.5 years. And as well as a retired person, if I want to focus on something, I do that one thing. But here, the people around the team, they all have other priority, other things that they have to do. Some teach, some do research, some have the other job that they have to work on. We meet once a week, once every couple of weeks. So as Laurel said, when we get to a meeting, it's not something we can just remember off the top of our head because it happened last week, but it could have been a month ago. So we got to go back to our notes, go back to our the last meeting and find out and remember what was done. So that also takes time. And now that the project is finished, we wait for what are we going to do with the information that we have found, and who makes a decision for that if it's not decided by the research team itself. So again, more waiting and more time. So that's something that I learned that I have to get used to. That as a patient going into it without that experience before is very surprising, but it worked. Throw it back to you, Larry.
Yeah, thank you, Sunny. I think is there anything else that was really surprising for either of you?
How well, and again, this is our team specifically, and I'm hope that in the real world is the same way, is that as a patient and as a patient researcher, we are the newbies. And when we're working with other researchers on that team, who may come into the team with more experience, but not necessarily in the driver's seat, that I initially felt when I first started this process is that am I going to be taken seriously? Are these folks going to be listening to what I want to do and what I put into this process? But as I found through that the whole time with the study, is that Larry and Ryan and others treated us, Laurel and myself, as equal. they had I talk about patient, but they had the patient to assist us through this process, understanding that we don't have the same experience in research as they do. So I think that is a very important part of for the success of patient-initiated research, that the people that patient brings aboard understand and also have the patients to support the patient initiator of the research through the process. Because as we start this, we don't have the same shared experience, but they are brought on board as a specialist to the team, and that's something that's important to hold on to.
I think one of the things that we were aware of, and we actually had discussions about the fact that we're pioneers. We were pioneering this process. And so it was nice that Larry, as an experienced researcher, was open to all of this and accepting. And I was excited that we were involving Ryan, who was an early researcher, thinking this is our opportunity to change the culture. We know that culture change is long and slow, and I was really excited by the idea. Okay, let's make this normal. Let's make this a normal thing for young researchers. In the next generation of researchers, perhaps this is going to be polished and easy, and hopefully there'll still be openings to change a little bit and to expand and consider new roles and new ways of working together. So
it was scary. It was scary when we undertook the research, the library search, and also went to look for people who have done this to interview. It was scary how few people have done this and how little information we have out there and how difficult it is to find the right information, because even just the nomenclature, just looking, you go out there, Ryan went out there and looked up patient-initiated research and only found a small portion because the same process had so many other different names and terms that it was really part of the study was that phase was just to find out all the different names attributed to patient-initiated research, so then we can again undertake further find research to look into those other type of processes. So that was scary, realize how new this is, and how surprisingly few people are actually doing it in the health field. I would venture to say more of this is done in consumer products in other areas, but in healthcare research, it hasn't been done that much with patient initiating a research.
yeah, it wasn't so much that there was a lot of research that we had to sift through. It was more that, okay, this term sounds kind of patient-initiated-y, but it's really a patient-oriented research project. And so we were surprised. Well, I wasn't actually surprised at the paucity of research already done, but it was challenging. And of course, that's again that whole pioneering a new frontier. There's not going to be that much ahead of you. So it was exciting to be part of that.
That was especially interesting, I think, for me, was that we were thinking, okay, we'll just do a search on patient-initiated research. Boom, we're going to get lots of information on it. And no, that was not what happened, because what people were calling patient-initiated research did not match what we were expecting to see or wanted to look for. So we had to expand our search, and we were going through lots of different databases and collecting lots of articles and trying to figure out which ones were real or not. And I remember we had lots of discussions about that. How do we proceed here when we're faced with getting information that's not what we really want to see? And suddenly we're looking at a lot more titles and abstracts than we had thought we were going to need to look for. And we asked you to how you wanted to get involved and how you wanted to search through these articles and that sort of process. Was there anything about that process itself that you'd like to comment on?
It,
So I think we were offered the opportunity at each stage, and which was very nice to have people checking in. Do you want to participate in this? We can provide you with some guidance around this. Yeah, so we were offered support, and we were offered some autonomy in terms of how much of our personal time we wanted to spend, and how much we wanted to leave to the researchers, or if we wanted to expand our own capacity. So that was a nice aspect of it.
it was very detailed. Some of the work involves very detailed. One of the things that was done as part of the library research, Ryan and Larry would have gone through hundreds of articles to pinpoint the one that's relevant. But even then, there may be 30, 40 articles that Laurel and I would have to read through and decide whether it's relevant to what we are looking for. So, going through all those articles is not something that myself as a patient is used to. Reading through, I would say that reading through some of the scientific material is like watching paint dry on the wall. It's it's a process. It's not exciting, but it had to be done. So we did it, and for myself, there have been times that I feel great and I can just take on, especially when the drug's in me, and then the other time I feel terrible. I'm a patient. I'm still living through and going through some of the effect of what my disease laid on me. So, but the study goes on, and if you are in the chair directing the study, you can't just take a day off. So that was part of the thing that I experienced, have to go through, that there's a responsibility to undertake, and that's part of the process. So that's a learning as well.
One of the things that came through for me very strongly, and Larry would have been very aware of this, and all the people who participated as patients in the past are going to know this, the acronyms. So when I was reviewing papers, it's lovely that the first time someone uses an acronym, they spell it out. But then 8 pages later, when you see 7 more of these acronyms, and you have to go back through the 8 pages to see where they first mentioned it, and know what that acronym is. So one of my little, what I'm always saying, can we just spell out every acronym every time? Because I can't be expected to memorize acronyms in a 8 or 20 page document as we go along. And the other thing is plain language. So I've developed I do a lot of research because of my own chronic diseases and healthcare problems of people that I'm a caregiver for. But it's nice to be able to voice these issues to actual researchers, and to highlight the importance of plain language and the whole acronym thing. I'm sure any researchers here are getting used to patient partners nagging at them on this issue too. And I just got that pitch in here.
Yeah, I never noticed that you had that thing about acronyms, Laurel. You never mentioned it before.
Do we have
But
any?
it's not just reading article acronym. You'll be at a meeting and half the people are speaking an acronym.
We have to come up with an acronym for Laurel, identifying acronyms. Oh, okay. But there is something in there, I'm sure. But this is something it was a learning experience for me, because I have done research for a long, long time. And the research that I did before I joined the support unit was not patient-oriented in nature. I mean, it was qualitative research. I was talking to patients all the time, but I was not asking them for their help in designing or running the research. I was collecting data from them. So for me, every step of the way, I had to stop and say, okay, do I need to do this? Do I need to get Laurel and Sunny to look at this, what I'm going to do next? Or should I just do it and then tell them what the outcomes were? Because sometimes that would be kind of like, I'm doing this, this, and this, and all of a sudden something else comes up. And I think, well, I can just do that now. But then I have to think, okay, what would Laurel say? What would Sunny say? So then I would have to take it to the next meeting, for example, and to make that decision. Is this something where I need to give up? No, not give up, but I mean, I have the expertise, but I don't have the direction. And so let's see if the direction is the right direction. So I think I was able to do that. I mean, I really worked hard to do that.
And I'll
Is
just
that a question?
put in, before we address that question, I'll just say we did a lot of consultation asynchronous by email. So we were given the opportunity on occasion to provide our feedback through email, which worked really well with our varying schedules.
Very good. And we are welcome, or we are, if anyone has any questions, please raise your hands. And I think Chelsea has a question, so we'll go to Chelsea.
More of a comment, really, Larry. I just wanted to say that this is really refreshing to hear. And for those of you who don't know, in Newfoundland and Labrador, through our support unit, we embarked on a much less formal scan of what does this mean about patient-initiated research, because we had some of our patient and public advisory council members who had research questions of their own and that they wanted to explore. And similar to your process, you know, we talked to a few folks across the country who said they were doing this kind of research to find out what kind of supports we would need to put in place, but much less rigorously than you did. And we kind of just jumped in full steam ahead, and we decided to support the project at the time that they wanted to do because it was time sensitive. And I won't go into too much detail because we're hoping to have a session on that later on this year. But it's really refreshing because I think a lot of these experiences and these processes that you've described are ones that team very much went through. And so it's nice to know that these are kind of common and shared experiences in the realm of patient-initiated research. And that hopefully will make it a little easier for those of us trying to support this kind of research in the future to be able to navigate what supports are actually needed. And I think actually one of the members of that project team has a question. If she doesn't mind speaking to it, I'll ask her to unmute here. Kathleen, a question in the chat.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so very happy to hear about your experience. And so we're just kind of wrapping up our project, but I was really curious about navigating roles in your work. So, you know, this is patient-initiated or patient-led research, but I'm curious about what that looked like in terms of how the project progressed, who took the lead on various aspects of the work, and if there was any sort of process that maybe you did or you realized you needed after the fact and kind of pushed in once you realized that there was that need, to just determine who was leading what aspects of the work and what that kind of leadership would look like.
But I take this. This project did not start out as a patient-initiated research. This project started out as about patient-initiated research to discover what's needed to support such a process. So it's more of a traditional research study. We have BC Support Unit provided the resource in the form of Colleen and McGavin and Larry and Ryan and so forth. And then Laura and I went on board as part of the patient council that we had at the time and endorsed the particular project. And then Laura and I stayed on as patient partner for the project. And then one day we look at each other, hey, this is really a patient-initiated research in itself, because there's a patient council who started this process, who wanted to start a system program but didn't know what's needed. So we need to have a study just to find out what's needed to have a system program for patient-initiated research. But very early on, the resources provided by BC Support Unit in terms of Larry, the researcher, Ryan, the research assistant, they basically put Laura and ourselves in the driver's seat. They supported us. They assisted us. They I wouldn't call it trained, but they educated us in the process as required. They took over the role where the research experience is required, such as securing the funding from BC Support Unit, which is easy because they already are providing funding, but there's a process to that, which Laura and I are not experienced with. they undertook all the aspects related to the hardcore technical research itself, the literature search, the development of the research guide, and so forth. But Laura and I participate in all aspects of those processes. Plus, I would say we directed the priority of what needs to be done, and Larry and Ryan undertook the doing of a lot of that. So it's a fairly equal process amongst the table, but each of us have our own special role in accomplish something based upon what our experience is and what our priority is. Laurel, does that meet with what you unmute?
There, I think I'm unmuted. I'll just say that we did have some discussion around roles. And as I mentioned earlier, there was flexibility in the discussion, right? It was like, oh, well, as around the issue of interviews, for instance. And interestingly enough, this is one of the things that we found in the analysis was that role definition is an important aspect in the carrying out of patient-initiated research. And from personal experience, that flexibility in those definitions is also important. Did we cover your question?
I think that was a good, those are great answers. And I think I can give you an example just quickly. When we were trying to decide what sort of analysis we were going to do, and my background is qualitative data analysis. So I suggested that we come up with this particular way of doing the analysis. And so we discussed the pros and cons of that. And at the end, we decided that that was the way we were going to go. So it was me providing my expertise in that and then making sure that that was something that would work in the project. And then we went ahead with a thematic analysis based on that. And I think Chelsea had her hand up again. Are you going to read us another question?
I will read you another question, but I'll give Kathleen. Did that adequately answer your question? She says, "Thanks, Sunny and Laurel. Really interesting to hear how the work evolved and how the unit supported the progression of roles." Yeah, and in our own in the project that Kathleen worked on, I think that was one of the, I don't want to call it a challenge, but it was certainly a learning that you really need to be clear on who has the authority to say, yes, we go ahead with this, or no, we don't, if there are disagreements among the team, or if someone's away for a meeting, for example, can the project still progress if a decision is made at that meeting, things like that. So it's really important, I think, to be clear on those sorts of things. Yeah, Sunny, go ahead.
And at the very start of this session, I mentioned that the big difference of patient-initiated research is that the patient initiated. The patient is a driver. In this particular case, there is a team. There has to be a team. Every member of the team has a special function, and they have to support that particular role. But when it comes, but the lead researcher or co-lead researcher would be the patient. So the decision has to be made by the patient in line with what that priority of that research is. What is the goal? What the aim of that research? But it is a team, and that although the patient, as I say, is going to make the decision in that, it's not a decision made in the vacuum. It's a decision made as part of the team, and everybody need to have the voice because the patient only comes with a certain degree of experience, and you need all the other experiences around the table to support that decision. But in the end, it's a patient-initiated research. So if I say I'm going to initiate research, then I better stand behind it and make the decision for it.
Thanks for clarifying that, Sunny. The other question I see here in the chat is from Teresa, who says, can we consider patient-oriented research with the level of patient engagement at that empower or lead end of the, if we're thinking about the International Association of Public Participation spectrum, so at the higher end of responsibility on that spectrum, can we consider that as patient-initiated research? And also with patient-initiated research, will patient partners be involved in the whole research process rather than just a few stages of the research process?
if I understand it correctly, patient-oriented research is where the patient is part of that team. The patient can take part in some or all aspects of that particular research team. The patient is not necessarily the decision maker. Okay? So patient-initiated research, yes, is at that level, that high level, but the patient has the responsibility and needs to undertake the decision making of that research. Again, it comes down to if you, as a patient, start that research, you need to take responsibility for decisions around that research. You can't jump in and then jump back out again. Now, I'm not saying that the decision making is alone to that patient. There are, and particularly in cases where it's a very technical research and a research lead is also required, then it's a co-led, right? But if you're patient initiated, you better take the responsibility for it as well. Sorry, Laura.
This is where the whole pioneering aspect comes in, right? So your question is very specific, and we're still developing this. So it's up to you and I and Sunny and other people to work out what the definition is. What we were looking at was an entree for patients to actually say, here's my idea, here's the rationale for wanting this explored. Is there potential, and can we do it? So not only defining what patient-initiated research is, but then figuring out the pathway. And I think the real, I think in the past, there's been a lot of consultation with patients after the research topic has been decided. And so I think here, one of the most important things is patient involvement in developing the research question. I think that's key. So it's because the idea, and one of the ideas I think of SPORE in the first place was that the healthcare system ought to be responsive to the needs of patients. And so in the past, there's been a very structured way of experts and other people deciding with some consultation of patients, maybe an hour meeting or a webinar here or there, to say, okay, patients, we've got this idea. We're going to need some buy-in, so come on board and help us get the buy-in. Or sometimes it's like, confirm for us that we're on the right track. And the danger in that is you're going to have a self-selected group of patients who already thinks you're on the right track that's going to join that team. And so this whole idea of patients getting to actually figure out what their needs are, express those needs, and have support around getting those needs met. So yeah, developing the research question is the short answer, and we're still figuring out what the rest of the process is.
It kind of reminds me of one of those logic problems where, you know, all patient-initiated research is patient-oriented research, but not all patient-oriented research is patient-initiated research, right?
That's exactly it. That's exactly. And it can be a fine line, right? It can be a fine line. And what ultimately I'd like to see is far in the future where we don't have the distinction is who has the idea, who has that need for a particular study, start the process because they know how and there's a pathway for them to do so. It could be the researcher, it could be the patient, but we're not defining it as one or the other because now we have a process in place for anyone who has the need can initiate. But right now, as Laura said, we're still trying to work out that line, that definition. But I still say, if you're going to start it, you take the responsibility for it.
One of the interesting things that came up in the interviews was that we had, I remember one interviewee actually saying, well, I wanted to do research about X, and I couldn't as a patient, and so I became a researcher. So we were actually interviewing a researcher who had previous experience of being a patient finding that there was no pathway.
I feel like I'm hogging the airtime with these questions. So I welcome any other questions to come into the chat or for folks to raise their hands, and I'll be able to see and unmute you if you like. We've only got about a minute left here, but I wanted to know if you could speak to where the project is going. What did you develop a pathway, and who can use that pathway?
That is a good question. Do you mind if I take that, Laurel, or do you want to answer that? Okay. So first of all, when we completed the study, we were also going through our planning for our next iteration of the support unit. So we've been kind of trying to figure out how this project fits in with that. So that's kind of one of our that's one of the things that we're doing now is that sort of planning. But this project was designed as a three-parter. First of all, was to understand what are the barriers and facilitators to doing patient-initiated research. Secondly, was to, based on that knowledge, come up with a program that could actually support one or two patient-initiated research projects. And then the third part of it was to actually run it. What we discovered from our first part of this project was it's way more complicated than we ever imagined it would be. And it would require a huge amount of support, and then trying to figure out where that support would go and how we would do that. So we're still in the process of understanding what we need to do next. But in order to move forward, we are wanting to now take the findings together that we did, because we ended up with how many pages was it? It was like, it ended up being a huge report. So we need to go back, and we're just in the process of taking that and writing an article about it. So this article is going to be designed to be available, accessible to anybody, so that any stakeholder can look into it, can read it. So Laurel and Sunny are about to embark on a writing project with me to write up the PIRAP project. And that, I think, is probably going to take, writing an article is going to take a little bit of time to get that out and done. So that's kind of our next step.
So Ryan submitted an executive report to the BC support unit. We don't know whether there's going to be funding or follow-up to carry on, but with the publication of this research project, we're hoping that it will be a good resource for other pioneers who are going down this path, and that it's going to be able to influence and help further development.
Well said, Laurel. Thanks.
I know quite a few folks here in Newfoundland and Labrador who are looking forward to that publication. So certainly we're hoping to use that as a resource. And I know our Patient and Public Advisory Council is very curious to know the results of your project. So I know we're 2 minutes over time here. There's actually one more question in the chat. I want to be mindful of your time, but if you're okay to answer it, I'll ask it. So
Yeah,
Kathleen
okay.
asks, how did you find having two patient partners on the project? Was it manageable in terms of workload and being able to make decisions as a group, or do you feel having a different number of patient partners might have had more utility?
I think, well, first of all, I think the number of patient partners you have around the table would depend on the particular study that you're undertaking, of course, and the experience and share experience that you want to have in that particular study. For ourselves, Laura and I work like partners. We're very, we go back and forth. There's things that she has strengths, but she's more involved with research itself, and I have strong opinions. So we tend to work in good conjunction with each other. We also are and continue to be, up until not too long ago, part of the patient council. So we have all the other patient partners behind us, although they're not at the table. They certainly are consulted if we have questions regarding what would be important for patients. So overall, I would say for our study, the two patient partner worked well, and I don't know if more patient partner would slow things down. And I always believe you should have more than one patient partner at a table, because it's really hard. I can share my voice, but I really can't speak for all patients. So I have another patient partner at the table, then we could at least have some consensus on issues. So having Laurel with me at the table, it worked out very well for this study.
And I think an absolute minimum of two is really, really important. I'm involved in some other projects where we have more voices, and just from that experience, it doesn't seem to be an impediment to have 3 or 4. I happen to be involved in co-leading a couple of other projects with the SPORE Evidence Alliance in the early stages, but one of them I'm co-lead, and one of them there are 2 patient co-leads, and then we have other patients as well on the team. So I don't see it as an impediment. I like the idea of involving more. Maybe Larry, you can tell us what it was like from your perspective.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is a bit of an odd situation because you two are just so engaged and so cooperative, and so, you know, we worked together as a really good team when it was the 4 of us with you, me, Ryan. It was just like we really worked well together. We would come to meetings, we would have very clear ideas what we wanted to do. We would talk about what needed to be done, you know, and then we would get our marching orders, and Ryan and I would go off and do whatever we needed to do, and then make sure we were trying to make sure we were in contact with you as much as we could. And then make sure that we were following the directions and that we were all working together on it. So this particular situation was great. I could say that it certainly was my responsibility to make sure that communication was good, and that that everybody was being engaged the way they needed to be engaged and wanted to be engaged. So that's kind of, I think, it's not so much the number of patient partners in this case, it's more about how you work with them. And in this case, you guys worked so well with us and we worked well together. So that wasn't an issue. But I've been involved in other projects where we do have a lot of patient partners, and some of them just don't show up. And that, I think, it's that commitment, my commitment to doing this well and your commitment to doing it well combined, that, you know, I think that's an important piece of this, right? And we built a relationship that allowed that to happen. Right. I think, you know, it's like earlier on, I put Laurel on the spot and asked her if she felt supported. I knew that she felt supported, so I could ask that question. But I also knew that if she didn't feel supported, that she would actually tell me, and she would have no problem doing that because we trust each other. I think that's it.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing. And Kathleen says that she likes your point about having patient co-leads in addition to other patients who might take a less involved role in the project. And she thanks you for sharing your learnings. And so do I. I mean, my goodness, I know we're now 6 minutes over time, but I really appreciate you all coming here today and sharing what you've learned so far about this. And hopefully we can continue to collaborate. I know, as I said, the patient-initiated research project that we supported over the past couple of years is coming into its dissemination phase. So there should be some learnings from that, both from, you know, the project outcome side of things, but also from the process learnings about patient-initiated research. And so hopefully now that we're starting to see more of this across the country, it'll create a nicer body of literature to inform future assistance programs. So thank you so much, Sunny and Laurel, Larry and Sada, for coming today to talk about this. And we really appreciate having you, and that you took up some of your morning for this.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
We look
you.
forward to learning from your process.
Yes, absolutely. We should definitely do that. And thanks all of the attendees, anyone who came to this. Really appreciate your staying right to the very end and the great questions. So thanks.
Absolutely. And if anyone has any questions that they want to pass on to the team after the fact, you're welcome to send me an email, and I'm happy to reach out to the team.
Yeah, always happy to answer questions.
Thank you for
Thank you,
coming.
Chelsea, for having us.
Anytime.
Thanks.
Thank you. It was lovely to meet you.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.